Hello, my friends. Happy Monday to you. I don't know about you, but I'm done. I am done dwelling on this election. I'm done being upset about what our fellow Americans have done to us, angry about what they've done to us. Now, I'm still upset and angry about it, but I'm done dwelling on that. I am ready to turn the page and start talking about the next phase of this fight. Because all is not lost. Now, if Donald Trump and Project 2025 and all of this stuff, if they're able to do everything that they want to do, this country will be forever changed. And the constitutional republic, as it has always existed, will no longer exist. However, it's not going to be quite as easy as they think for them to do this. And there is a lot that we can do to prevent some of this stuff completely from happening, to limit the extent of the damage, and to delay things. And that's what we need to focus on from a policy perspective in the next 2 and 4 years. The next 2 years are the most dangerous for us because this is where Trump and MAGA are at the height of their power. They have the White House, they have the Senate, and probably the House. And they will for the next 2 years. I think we'll be in a good position in 2 years to take back Congress. But for right now, we're in a very dangerous spot. But we are not without power. There are things we can do. We're going to have to battle them largely through procedure in the Congress, namely like the filibuster, if that's even going to exist anymore. And by the way, eventually the filibuster is going to go away. And honestly, and I'll talk about this at a later date, it's probably for the best. And some of you might be thinking, why, that's crazy, because that's the only thing saving us now in the Senate. I'll talk about that later. I'm not getting sidetracked. I just want to throw that out there. So procedurally in the Senate, we might be in Congress, we might be able to limit or slow down some things. But primarily, we're going to have to fight this stuff out in the courts. And I know some of you throw up your hands and say, oh, well, then we're screwed because Trump owns the courts. And whenever it gets to the Supreme Court, we're going to lose on every single issue. Well, that is not necessarily true. I don't believe that that's necessarily true. We're going to lose some issues. And there's no doubt this is a Trump-friendly court. But the court is not as fully corrupted, I think, as most people believe. For example, in one of the worst decisions in all of American history, that abominable decision on the Trump immunity claim, even in that case, they did not give Donald Trump everything they wanted. If they were completely in the tank for Donald Trump, they would have just said he has blanket immunity and dismissed that case. They didn't. They didn't say president has blanket immunity. They said he has a level of immunity for sure. That's disturbing. They also set some procedural requirements with respect to trying a president. But even with that case, had Donald Trump lost this election and the case proceeded in Judge Chutkan's court, I am completely confident that he would have been convicted and sentenced to prison. And so if the Supreme Court was as corrupted and completely in the tank for Trump as some people believe, they would have just dismissed it and never given the chance that he would have gone to trial. But they didn't do that. And there are other important cases in which this court has ruled against Donald Trump, even when he was in the White House. So all is not lost there. And keep in mind, too, here, let me put it this way. We're going to have to talk a lot over the next 4 years about things like executive power, separation of powers, the Constitution, executive orders. We're going to have to talk a lot about executive orders because a lot of people have no idea what an executive order really is and what a president can and cannot do by executive order. And I have a feeling we're going to see a lot of Trump executive orders, so we're going to have to talk a lot about that. But the Constitution really places great limit on not just the federal government, but the president. And Donald Trump is not going to be able to do a lot of the things he thinks he's going to be able to do and try to do. And it is on the basis of the Constitution that we're going to battle him. Now, I want to talk I'm going to begin this conversation today with a case from 2022 that is an important case. And in fact, the timing of this is funny. I woke up very early this morning. I just laid in bed for a long time, and I was thinking about all these things I need to talk to you all about. Separation of powers, Constitution, executive orders, all this stuff. All the videos that I need to make. How I want to present it to you all. And when I finally got my ass out of bed and got my coffee, sitting with my computer, I saw that I had a message from my mother-in-law, who had sent me a message like on Thursday and then on Friday, and I hadn't responded to her. And I'm thinking, oh great, she probably thinks I'm ignoring her. I promise you I wasn't. I just didn't see it until this morning. Anyway, she sent me a link to a video, and she wanted me to watch it and give her my thoughts on it. And the video was by a guy named Michael Popak, I believe is his name. Now I guess he's a lawyer. I've seen some of his videos in the past. I don't watch a lot of videos, to be honest. I just don't have the time. But I've seen him before. And the point of his video was that there was a Supreme Court decision from this Trump Supreme Court in 2022 that we can use against Donald Trump. And I completely agree with him. And I remembered in watching his video that when this case came out, in I believe like maybe April of 2022, before the midterms, I had made a video on this case. Like the morning it came out, I just got on my phone and stood there and gave my thoughts about it. And anyways, what this case is about, this was a case overturning a previous case called Chevron. And this case was called the Loper-Bright decision. And it overturned a previous case, I believe from the 80s, known as the Chevron decision, which upheld executive branch agencies' ability to regulate very broadly. In this particular case at issue in the Loper-Bright decision, it had to do with the EPA regulating greenhouse gases. And the Chevron decision said, yeah, the EPA, other executive branch agencies have broad authority to liberally interpret statutes passed by Congress and promulgate rules and regulations pursuant to those statutes. Well, the Supreme Court in the Loper-Bright decision from 2022 said no. The EPA does not have that much authority. And so it struck down some of these regulations having to do with greenhouse gas emissions. And I did this video because people on the left were apoplectic. They were just so angry because they had gutted these climate change, these environmental regulations, and people were upset about that. But that's the extent of their understanding about what the court did. And so I made a video saying, yeah, I understand why you're upset about the environmental regulations being rolled back, but here's what you're missing. This is actually a very good case if you are concerned about MAGA fascism and Trump authoritarianism, because this greatly limits the power of the executive branch, the power of executive branch agencies, which are controlled by the president, the power of the president and those agencies to do things on their own. And this is actually a good thing. And so that's what his video was about. That's what that case was about. And that's what I talked about. In fact, I'm gonna include a part of my video from 2 years ago in a little bit here. And I will link to the full video in the description below. And by the way, that's posted on a YouTube channel that I don't really use anymore. But it's still up so you can watch it. Anyway, this Loper-Bright decision, what it said was, and see, let me set the stage a little bit. I don't want to get it too much into it here. But the Constitution, the way that it limited the power of the federal government and the power of any one branch of government from accumulating too much power and becoming tyrannical, is that they created this separation of powers where they took the three main functions of government and separated those out among three different branches. And each branch is able to exercise their authority, and no other branch is able to exercise that authority. So in Article 1, they set up the power of Congress to make law. Only Congress can make law. In Article 2, they gave the president the power to enforce the law. And in Article 3, they gave the courts the power to adjudicate cases and controversies that arise under the law. And no branch can exercise the authority of the other branches. And by separating things out that way, you prevent any one branch or any one person, like the president, from accumulating and being able to exercise all three main functions of government. Because if the president were able to write the law, enforce the law, and decide cases under the law, that's absolute authority. That's dictatorship, is what that is. And so the framers of the Constitution sought to prevent the accumulation of power in that way by separating out the functions of government. And we call it the separation of powers. We're going to talk a lot about that. Now, the problem is, over the last many decades, that carefully constructed balance of powers between the three branches it's gone out of whack, for lack of a more specific legal term, because certain of the branches of government have exercised power that is not theirs to exercise. For example, the courts legislating from the bench in an unconstitutional way. The courts are allowed only to interpret the laws in order to resolve cases and controversies, yet far too often the courts have just changed the law on their own, made up the law, right? Legislating from the bench. They don't have the authority to do that. But at issue in the Loper-Bright decision was this practice over decades now, and has really increased in recent years, of the Congress delegating their authority to write laws to the executive branch. And so they'll just say, you know what, we don't know what to do here, so we're going to pass a law that says the president can write the law about this, essentially. And why that has happened is that most of these members of Congress are stupid and unserious people who aren't really interested in governing. They don't really care about passing laws. They ran for Congress because they wanted to be members of Congress. They don't really care about doing anything. They just want to have their asses kissed. They want to go around and act like royalty, think, I'm senator, I'm congressperson, so-and-so, and they don't really care about actually doing anything. They just want to go on TV and be a star. It's like show business for the talentless, right? That's what politics is for a lot of these people. And so they get to Congress and they don't really want to do the hard work. And plus, a lot of things, passing legislation is difficult, and a lot of these issues are complex, and these people are stupid and lazy. And so they just say, we'll just let the executive branch do it. So for example, with these climate change regulations, climate change and the science is difficult to understand. And how do you pass a law limiting greenhouse gas emissions? How many parts per billion of this, and which gases should we regulate, and which the actual writing of the statutes themselves, even though you might think, okay, we should regulate greenhouse gases, the specifics of the law are not easy to agree upon. So they just say, we're going to pass a law saying that the executive branch can regulate greenhouse gas emissions. And so the executive branch, via the EPA, when we're talking about greenhouse gas emissions, writes regulations to implement Congress's wishes that we regulate greenhouse gases. Well, those regulations are essentially laws, right? You could call them whatever you want, regulations, rules, but they're laws. Well, the problem is only Congress has the authority to write law. And the question is, can Congress write a law giving the executive branch the power to write law? That doesn't seem right. And you can't. They can't do that. They can't just delegate their constitutional authority to another branch of government. And the Loper-Bright decision, the Supreme Court said, yeah, you can't do that. You can't just give away your legislative authority to the executive branch. And it went further than that. And in the video, of which I'm going to show you a clip, I talk about it just from that perspective. I hadn't, I'm telling you, when I recorded this video, the case had just come out and I had only read summaries of the holding. I hadn't read the specifics. So the decision itself was a little more nuanced. It wasn't just a separation of powers case. It also had to do with where there is ambiguity in the statute. Who gets to resolve the ambiguity? Does the EPA get to say, well, since this law is ambiguous, we're just going to do whatever we want? Or do the courts get to resolve the ambiguity? Hey, if there's ambiguous language, we get to say what Congress meant. So it also had to do with that. Anyway, the point here is that the Loper-Bright decision from this Supreme Court, this exact Supreme Court, said that the executive branch, the president, does not have the power to make law. All right. And that is a good thing, because a lot of what Donald Trump is going to try to do is going to be through regulations he passes through executive branch agencies. Well, now we have a case from his Supreme Court that says, no, there's a limit in what you can do by regulation. You can't just do whatever the hell you want and pass laws through the EPA or whatever other executive branch agency. You don't have the power to do that. So that's going to greatly limit Donald Trump's ability to do things. That case also gave people affected by those regulations much more ability to sue the administration in court and to enjoin those regulations, to put a halt on them until they're adjudicated by the courts. And so this is going to be an important way in which we can battle Donald Trump and the things he wants to do. So why don't I just go ahead and play you this clip. And I also, just to show you, this has always been my area of expertise. This has been the reason I started this channel, to talk about these kinds of issues. You got to understand these sorts of issues. And people also, it's important. This is really important. You have to understand the issues, especially when it comes to legal cases, because what's reported in the news oftentimes isn't the important holding. So for an example, in this Loper-Bright decision, people were just reacting to the fact that these environmental regulations were overturned. And they were really upset about that, understandably, because that's what the press told you what the case was about. But fundamentally, that's not what the case was about. It just so happened that this particular case was about environmental regulations, but it could have applied to anything. What the case was really about was the extent of executive power. That's what it was really about. And to that extent, this was a very good case, even though the immediate political outcome in terms of environmental regulations might not have been the outcome you wanted. Fundamentally, in terms of the Constitution and the balance of power, this is a good decision. And we can still regulate those greenhouse gases, but the point is that's properly done by Congress, because those are laws. Congress has to pass the law. Congress has to be more specific about how they want to regulate greenhouse gases and give the EPA much more clear direction about how to implement the law. That was the problem with what the Environmental Protection Agency did, and it was a problem with what Congress did when it passed that law. It did not give the EPA specific instructions about what those environmental regulations should look like. And you just can't do that. And that is a very good thing. So let me just go ahead and play this. Please watch this with that in mind. And I'm going to talk more on the other side of this video. Please watch. Now, you are all, well, you should be, rightly concerned about this rising strain of authoritarianism in the Republican Party. You saw what Donald Trump tried to do, and now you're worried about the court.
You're worried about Republicans getting back in control of Congress. You know, this current crop of Republicans, these fascist, at least fascist adjacent cult, Trump cult Republican Party. You're worried about them having control, Trump getting back in, or a mini Trump like DeSantis. You're worried about, Trump getting back into the White House. You're worried about now, him having appointed 1/3 of the Supreme Court, and now it's a 6-3 supermajority of conservatives on the court. You're worried about the midterms and Republicans getting back control of of Congress. Now, imagine if this notion of delegating away legislative authority, or just, any branch giving away their authority to any of the other branches. Imagine if they could do that. Imagine if that was now acceptable, that the branches can give away their authority to the other branches. What would prevent, say Trump comes back into power, say Republicans win back Congress, okay? Now you got the court, in the hands, supermajority 6-3 of Republicans. You got the Congress. Just assume for a minute that they're controlled by this Trump cult wing of the Republican Party, which is now, almost the entire Republican Party, and you got Trump in the White House. What, in that scenario, what is preventing Congress and the court from saying, you know what, the stakes are too high, it is too hard to get anything done, we need action, we trust Donald Trump, so at least temporarily, we're going to give away all our power. We're going to delegate our constitutional power to the president because we trust Trump and we want him to be able to enact his agenda unencumbered by any checks and balances. So what if that were to happen? Congress just says, you know what, Donald Trump, you have all our power. You write the laws. And the courts say, you know what, Donald Trump, it takes too long to get these cases decided through the courts. We're just mired, we're mired with all our rules and our regulations. It takes too long to get anything done through the judicial system. So we're going to at least temporarily give you all the judicial authority that we have. So now you have in the hands of a single person, the president, the power to write the laws, enforce the laws, and then decide cases and controversies under the law. That is a dictator. That is absolute power. All the functions of government concentrated in the hands of one person, one branch of government. Now, obviously, that's an extreme example of what's at play here. Okay, that's hopefully never going to happen. But if you say that the Congress allows, in this case with the EPA, that the Constitution allows Congress to delegate their authority, to give away their legislative authority to the president, then there's no limiting principle in the Constitution or anywhere else. If you're saying that the Constitution allows that, then there is nothing in the Constitution or anywhere else that would prevent this extreme example of, essentially creating a dictatorship. There's nothing preventing that. There's nothing in the law or the Constitution to prevent that. If you're going to say that it is okay that the Constitution allows Congress to give away their authority, the framers would never have stood for this. So this decision today was the right decision. No question, it was the right decision. Not because it has anything to do with environmental regulations. Environmental regulations are not the central holding here. That was just the case that got here with this issue. But it's far beyond that. Now, I understand for some of you who want, robust environmental regulations, I understand how this could be upsetting because this goes against your policy objectives. Okay, but that is short-sighted. What you should be more concerned about is the future of our republic, especially now when you can see how easily we could lose all of this. We have to safeguard these protections that are built in the Constitution to prevent this kind of dictatorship that this could lead to. All right? So you have to be very steadfast in guarding against anything that could upset the constitutional order of things. And again, this ruling today does not prevent us from enacting strong, greenhouse gas laws. Okay? There's nothing preventing that. This is not a ruling on the constitutionality of regulating greenhouse gases. Absolutely, Congress can regulate greenhouse gases, but it must be Congress that does it because they're laws. Okay, they're not something else just because you call it something else. A rose by any other name. You can call laws whatever the hell you want, but that doesn't change the fact that they're laws. Okay, and just calling them regulations because they're coming out of the executive branch doesn't change them from laws to something else. They're laws. Only Congress can pass laws. So that's what happened here. If you want environmental regulations, if you want to regulate greenhouse gases, if you want to put a statutory scheme in place and have penalties and set limits of carbon dioxide or limits of whatever gases, whatever you want to do, you can do it. But it has to be done through Congress. That's the point here. So I understand some people are upset, but keep your eye on the bigger picture here. Okay? This is a case that came out of a supermajority Republican court, and this could, prevent the kind of fascist takeover of the country, this authoritarianism that could ultimately result in the consolidation of powers in a single person, a single branch of government. The kind of thing that too many Republicans seem all too willing to go along with as long as they're concentrating power in the hands of someone like a Donald Trump. Okay? This prevents that, or this helps prevent that. You do otherwise. You allow branches of the government to give away their power to the other branches, then you can easily consolidate the different functions of government into the hands of one person and create a dictatorship.
Okay, I hope that all made sense to you. And again, we can, and remember, I recorded that video way back early 2022. And I immediately knew that this was a good case because we weren't done with Donald Trump. We had hoped we were done with him. He was out of office. We knew he was going to run again. And I knew that this is a good decision because we're going to be able to limit, if God forbid Donald Trump got back in, and he's getting back in, but we would be able to use this case to limit what he and Republicans are going to try to do in their executive overreach. Okay, now, once upon a time, Republicans went back when they were conservative, pre-Trump, when they actually cared about the Constitution, they wouldn't have wanted to accumulate power in the presidency. Well, they're no longer interested in the Constitution. They're no longer conservatives, and they want to concentrate power in the president and to let him essentially rule as a dictator, and for the Congress, controlled by Republicans, to simply just be a rubber stamp for the president. But back in the day, they would have agreed with me on this thing. And back in the day, Democrats would have disagreed with me largely on all of this. I'm hoping Democrats now see the value in making sure that the federal government stays within the bounds of the Constitution. For a long time, Democrats have pushed for an expansion of the authority of the federal government. And the problem is, yeah, things might go well for you if your side controls the federal government, but now you can see how that is a recipe for disaster when a wannabe dictator like Donald Trump and his MAGA cult control the federal government. Now, over the last several decades of expanding the power of the federal government, now Donald Trump and his MAGA cult have all of this power that they shouldn't rightly have, because the Constitution doesn't actually give the president and the federal government writ large the authority that we have given them over the last several decades. And that is why I have always been a champion of trying to get the federal government back within the limits that the Constitution places on it. And largely, Democrats have been opposed to me on those things. Hopefully now they will be my allies in those things, because that is where we can protect ourselves against fascism. Fascism. Sorry, my voice is kind of scratchy. Soccer game this weekend, a lot of intense, a lot of yelling. Now my throat is suffering as a result. Anyway, I'm just hoping that people start to realize how important it is, no matter what your politics. Okay, you may be as far to the left progressive, as you want to be. I mean, as is possible. And you should still support my position that we need to limit the authority of the federal government. Because once you expand the federal government's power, especially the president, and it falls to a fascist cult and their cult leader as president, then that power that you have given to the federal government outside the bounds of the Constitution, they can now use that power against you. And that's sadly now where we're at. But a lot of that power that has been given to the federal government and to the president over the last many decades is not actually legal. It is not constitutional. And this is where we could be pleasantly surprised by this Supreme Court. Because this Supreme Court agrees with me on this stuff. Now, there are some things they go in the wrong direction with respect to presidential power, as we saw in that despicable immunity decision. But when it comes to separation of powers, the role of the federal government, this court has actually gotten things right. And these people have built their careers on that interpretation of the Constitution, long before Donald Trump came along. And I fully believe that they are not going to throw away their entire belief system and what they have based their professional careers on as judges, throw that completely away in order to empower Donald Trump, to completely abandon every legal principle that they have held dear for their entire their entire legal careers in order to empower Donald Trump. I don't think they're going to do it. I think they may very well hand Donald Trump a lot of big defeats on some of the things he wants to do. Because based on things that they have written throughout their careers, they will be in opposition to some of the expansions of power that Donald Trump and his MAGA cult are going to try to push through over the next 4 years. So it is on that basis that we have a real shot to defeat, limit, and delay a lot of the things that Donald Trump is going to want to do. And it is really important. And it is important that we understand this. And this, by the way, is one of the ways where we can get perhaps to people who have been conservatives, are wary of centralized government power, who have been Republicans and who voted for Donald Trump. Executive overreach and limiting the power of the federal government, as we're going to have to try to do, is one of the ways we can maybe get through to these people. And that is why we're going to have to be on message. And this is going to have to be part of our message over the next 4 years, is talking about these unconstitutional overreaches by Donald Trump and the MAGA cult, and try to appeal to conservatives and principled people who, for some reason, voted for Donald Trump. Maybe we can get to some of those people. But even if not, we can use those principles to try to combat Donald Trump in the courts. So, a lot more to say about this. A lot more. This is going to be something I talk a lot about. And by the way, you subscribe to this channel, you watch these videos, you're going to get a free legal education. You're going to know more about the Constitution, I promise you, than most everyone you know. And so for that reason alone, you should be watching this channel. And I hope you do. And I hope you enjoy what's coming. And another thing, I thought about this. I think I'm going to create a playlist and do some videos on this. We're starting to see some people who voted for Donald Trump already start to regret it. Already start to understand that some of the things they believed were lies. And there's going to be a lot of that in the next 4 years. And you better believe I'm going to be here. You know, you and I, we're going to be saying, I told you so, or we tried to warn you. We're going to be saying those things a hell of a lot over the next 4 years. And I'm going to be reporting on some of the ways in which these people are going to wake up to the fact that they made a huge mistake and they really screwed themselves. And I'm going to start a playlist, I think, dedicated to that. So more about that. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so already. Turn on notifications. Follow me on Facebook, The Romano Report. And be well, and I will talk to you again soon.